Busch Motorsports has sued Rev Racing, and Suarez will likely be returning to Trackhouse Racing after winning Atlanta Motor Speedway for 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start to talk about QuickTie, as it was announced on Thursday that QuickTie will sponsor Chandler Smith once again in 2024. They already sponsored him at Atlanta Motor Speedway and was able to finish in the runner position and second place. QuickTie sponsored Chandler Smith in multiple races last year with Conor Lich Racing, and also sponsored a majority races in the Truck Series the last couple years as well. It's really good to see that QuickTie will once again be working with Chandler Smith in 2024, and glad to see he has a loyal sponsor working with him for 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Gear Wrench. As it was announced on Thursday that Gear Wrench will sponsor Corey Heim in 3 races in the Xfinity Series in 2024. They'll sponsor him in Las Vegas next week, they'll sponsor him in Phoenix, and then they'll sponsor him at Richmond. Corey Heim is going to drive the number 26 car for Sam Hunt Racing for quite a few races this year in Xfinity in 2024, and to see that Gear Wrench is going to be that main sponsor, I think is phenomenal and really incredible. So I'm excited to see that Gear Wrench is going to be working with Corey Heim once again in 2024, and glad to see that there'll be a sponsor for him in the 2024 season. I think it is a pretty big and massive deal. Nonetheless, like I said, really happy and glad to see they'll be behind the wheel of the 26 car for quite a few races this year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jesse Love. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley, I believe yesterday or Friday, that Jesse Love became the first driver in Xfinity history to qualify on the pole in the first 2 starts of his NASCAR Xfinity Series career. Jesse Love was able to win the pole at Daytona and won the pole at Atlanta Motor Speedway a couple days ago. This is really huge for Jesse Love. We obviously know that Rich Schultz Racing always knows how to bring the pace and speed, especially at super speedways, and for Jesse Love to be able to go out there and win the pole in 2 straight races in only your first 2 career starts, I think that is absolutely an amazing and incredible accomplishment for Jesse Love. So nonetheless, once again, a massive and huge accomplishment for him, and congratulations to Jesse Love on becoming the first driver in Xfinity Series history to have 2 straight poles in his first 2 Xfinity Series starts. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Suarez. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley after tonight's race that Suarez became the first foreign-born NASCAR driver to win on an oval and a road course in the NASCAR Cup Series. Suarez was able to win a course at Sonoma 2 years ago in 2022, and was also able to pick up the victory earlier this evening at Atlanta Motor Speedway, which of course was his second career Cup Series victory. He also is, I believe, the third foreign-born driver to also have multiple wins in the NASCAR Cup Series as well. This is a massive and huge accomplishment for Suarez, to basically have 2 wins in your career, and basically in a year where you got to step up and perform. For him to have that record, I think is phenomenal and absolutely incredible. So I'm extremely happy for Suarez, and like I said, I'm glad to see that Suarez was able to go ahead and win this race. I think it's a massive and a really huge deal for him to get the victory overall and to become the first driver that to have a win on an oval road course that is not from the United States. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Conor Lich. As it was, and basically there was a Trans Am race that took place at Sebring International Raceway, and Conor Lich has already had a big year by winning the Roush 24, was able to go and win the Trans Am TA2 race at Sebring International Raceway. It's unclear what the schedule for Conor Lich is going to be in NASCAR, but to see that Conor Lich was able to go out there and win another big race is pretty awesome to see. I've been a pretty big fan of Conor Lich, and there's a lot of talent inside of Conor Lich. Again, I think this is going to be a really strong and fantastic year and fantastic season for Conor Lich this year, and I do believe that Conor Lich is going to win quite a few Trans Am races throughout the 2024 season, and I also do expect that Conor Lich will make some starts in Xfinity and trucks when he does turn 18 years old. We'll probably hear about his schedule in the not-so-distant future, but once again, like I said, I'm very happy to see that Conor Lich was able to win the Trans Am race at Sebring International Raceway. And now we're going to jump on to the next story as we're talking about Lego. Now, it was reported by Matt Weaver and many reporters in the industry, as according to William Byron, apparently Lego has actually been in talks and conversations with William Byron. Since they know that William Byron is now a pretty big Lego fan, and obviously William Byron had been on a TV show called Lego Masters, which is on Fox, Lego apparently is in talks and conversations to work with William Byron, and there may be a partnership and a sponsorship coming. I don't think that Lego has ever sponsored a NASCAR driver. I could be wrong in that, and if I'm wrong in that, let me know that in the comments. But I think it is pretty huge that Lego, one of the biggest companies in the U.S. and one of the biggest companies in the world, is in pretty big talks and conversations to potentially work with one of the best drivers in the NASCAR Cup Series. He just won the Daytona 500 this year and was also, of course, able to win 6 races last year. Has had an okay start to the 2024 season. I do expect that we'll see a sponsorship deal done really soon. It's unclear how many races they will sponsor him, because it sounds like it is going to be a sponsorship deal that Lego is going to have. But nonetheless, I think it is pretty awesome. I'm glad to see that Lego is in pretty big talks and conversations to work with him in 2024. Really happy and psyched to see this overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar. As it was announced on Thursday afternoon, that IndyCar is going to be banning going below the yellow line off Turn 4 during this year's Indianapolis 500. Last year, if you watched the Indianapolis 500, you saw what Joseph Newgarden and Marcus Ericsson were doing. They both went below that line, and it's very dangerous. Now, it could be a gray area because there could be some penalties that could be handed, especially if they do it during the main event. It seems like it could be for the end of the race. That wasn't made clear in the media when they spoke to them earlier this week on that. But to me, I think this is absolutely the right and great decision, in my opinion, for them to go ahead and ban this, because it was getting extremely dangerous. It was innovative. I'll give them credit that Joseph Newgarden and Marcus Ericsson were making a very innovative move to go ahead and go below that white line. But to see that IndyCar is making, in my opinion, the right decision, because it was getting to the point where it's going to be getting extremely dangerous, especially if you hit that barrier and it goes and ricochets back across the racetrack. That could be very scary very quickly. So to see that IndyCar is very smart and they're playing it correctly by going ahead and banning this decision, I think is a right and a really good decision on IndyCar's end and on IndyCar's part. So nonetheless, really happy and glad to see that IndyCar's made the decision. I know some will probably disagree with me in the comments, but to me, I think for the safety of the sport and the safety of the future, I think they absolutely had to go ahead and do this, because in my opinion, I think this was absolutely the right decision. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Atlanta Cup Series race. Now, if you watched the Atlanta Cup Series race earlier tonight, you saw one of the best races in NASCAR Cup Series history and one of the closest finishes in NASCAR history of all time. The finish between the top two was 0.03 seconds, which is the third closest finish in NASCAR Cup Series history, which second place was Ryan Blaney. Always seems to be in really close finishes in NASCAR Cup Series competition. This is only behind the 2011 Aaron's 499 at Talladega and the 2003 Carolina Dodge Dealers 400. This also is the closest finish, I believe, in NASCAR Cup Series history for the 3 drivers in the top 3 positions, which between the top 3, the margin of victory was 0.007 seconds. This is absolutely huge for the sport. A lot of people have been talking about this on social media, and I think that this could be one of the biggest moves in NASCAR Cup Series history. And many people, including myself, are considering this to be potentially the greatest finish in NASCAR Cup Series history and one of the greatest finishes of all time in motorsports history. You're not going to get a motorsport that puts on great finishes like this. Above all, I thought the race was absolutely phenomenal and amazing to watch, but to see them have the closest finish in NASCAR Cup Series history, or the second closest finish, and the closest finish in Atlanta history, which I don't think anyone thought they were going to be topping the Atlanta finish from 2001, which what's funny is technically this is Kevin Harvick's third race in the booth, and it was his third win in the Cup Series. I think it is pretty cool to see that Atlanta was able to break a record and be able to have a finish like this. I think this is absolutely huge and amazing for the sport overall, and nonetheless glad to see that the Atlanta Cup Series race was able to have one of the closest finishes in NASCAR Cup Series history, which I thought overall was a phenomenal and incredible race, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, I did a video talking about this on the channel yesterday when you guys are watching this. But yesterday during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Atlanta Motor Speedway, Shane Van Gisbergen was able to finish in third position. This was his first career top 5 finish in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. This is absolutely huge for Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, SVG in this race probably had about a 10th to 12th place car most of the day, but he kept himself up in track position, and Bruce Schlicker was able to really help Shane Van Gisbergen in a big way by playing a great and a really strong strategy to help him out, get that first career top 5, because he decided to come down pit road. You had a lot of drivers run out of gas during that time. Haley Deegan ran out of gas right before the restart happened. Jesse Love, who dominated the race. I think AJ Allmendinger ran out of gas, but SVG was able to get up to third. Unfortunately, could not get by Chandler Smith or Austin Hill to get the win. But to see that SVG was able to get his first career top 5 finish in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, I think is pretty awesome to see. I have been a big fan of Shane Van Gisbergen's, and I do believe that SVG is going to be able to win quite a few races in Xfinity Series this year. And if he does well enough, that could lead to him getting into the Cup Series next year, though he probably won't get in the 99 at this point, considering Dale Suarez probably is returning to Trackhouse Racing next year after winning at Atlanta. But again, a huge accomplishment for SVG. It's a big win for his career, and like I said, I'm just really happy and glad to see that Shane Van Gisbergen was able to get a top 5 finish in only his second career Xfinity start, which of course now has 2 career top 5s in 5 starts in the top 3 divisions, and only has 1 finish outside, I believe, the top 15 in the 5 races he ran, which I think for him, that is a pretty awesome accomplishment, and glad to see that Shane Van Gisbergen was able to go ahead and do that and was able to finish inside the top 5. A pretty massive and great accomplishment for him, and again, massive and huge congratulations to him on being able to do that, because I think it's a pretty awesome and incredible move for his career in NASCAR. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about AJ Allmendinger. Now, there was an article that came out from Dustin Albino on Thursday talking about AJ Allmendinger. Now, AJ had replied to many of the media members saying that he wanted to actually return to the NASCAR Cup Series full-time in 2024 with Kaulig Racing. Obviously, he will be running part-time in the Cup Series with Kaulig Racing in the number 16 car, but will not be full-time this year and this season. He's going to run a select number of races. He actually was able to finish, I believe, in 6th or 7th position in this year's Daytona 500. Now, obviously, he's going to run some road course races this year, and again, his full focus is going to be on the Xfinity Series. Look, I do agree. I do wish that AJ Allmendinger would have been able to at least stay in the Cup Series full-time, but unfortunately, the biggest thing that comes into play when it comes to NASCAR is you have to have funding and sponsorship to compete in the sport. And unfortunately for AJ Allmendinger, that was kind of the decision that Kaulig Racing decided to make, was to go ahead and focus on the sponsorship and funding. That's why they decided to go ahead and unfortunately take him out of the car, which is disappointing for full-time. Again, he is going to be part-time with this team, but I think for his sake, they probably wish they would have kept him behind the wheel, considering that he probably would have won some races, especially on the road courses. But I do want to say, like, at least he's going to be part-time in Cup this year, but it is a shame to see that he's not going to be full-time racing in NASCAR in 2024 in Cup. At least he'll be in the Xfinity Series this year, which I think is really cool, but unfortunately will not be in the Cup Series this year full-time in 2024. But I think he does have a really good chance to win the Xfinity Series championship in 2024. I think he'll be a big threat and contender to get it done. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Weatherman and JJ Yly. Now, one of the biggest drama points that came out during the NASCAR Xfinity Series race yesterday, which there really wasn't a lot of drama in this race, was the kind of fight that took place between Kyle Weatherman and JJ Yly. So coming out until I think about halfway through the race, or lap 60 or something along those lines in the race, Kyle Weatherman got into the back of JJ Yly. JJ Yly driving a 14 car for SS Greenlight Racing, and Kyle Weatherman driving the 91 car for DGM Racing. And Kyle unfortunately got in the back of JJ Yly and spun him out. There was radio communication that took place on social media that was kind of written by a lot of reporters, and basically they were threatening that they were going to beat Kyle Weatherman up after the race. Well, after the race happened, I believe the crew chief of the number 14 car, I can't remember exactly who the crew chief was, he went up to confront Kyle Weatherman after the race. Basically talk about pants at one point in this situation. But Kyle Weatherman basically didn't even really throw a punch because he didn't get an opportunity to throw. And I think the crew members of the number 91 team went over there and basically broke it up pretty much in an instant. Look, I completely understand the JJ Yly's crew for being frustrated about the situation. This is a team that's not in a really good position when it comes to owners' points because the 14 car did not have a good run at Daytona after Daniel Suarez sadly crashed out of that. And I understand being frustrated and upset with the fact that you were involved in an incident and a wreck. But to me, it was just an accident. And I feel like that they completely overreacted in this situation. And I think it was a little bit of overreaction from the 14 team and organization. It was just a couple baby punches that were thrown. It wasn't this really big fight that I think a lot of people were being teased that could end up happening. And I think that is definitely really, really unfortunate because, like I said, I would love to see a fight for sure between these crew members and these teams. But I don't think he wanted to fight him. Again, even Kyle, apparently from radio communication that surfaced on Twitter, basically he even apologized because he said he didn't do it intentionally. And I do agree, it wasn't even an intentional situation. He accidentally ran into the back of him and it sadly caused a wreck. I think it was overreaction on the number 14 team's part, and there might be some penalties coming the way of them because that is a little unacceptable and uncalled for, in my honest opinion, to be that aggressive and get mad, especially over a super speedway wreck, which is now the second time in the last year that's happened because remember Matt Crafton got into a fight with Nick Sanchez after that race. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Roush Chastain. Now, during the media sessions yesterday, Roush Chastain was interviewed by many media members, including multiple people from French, including, I think, Steven Sump and Tanner Marlar. And Roush Chastain basically says that he wants to see more practice brought back to the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, he is not the first driver who's talked about bringing more practice back. But I entirely agree with Roush Chastain on this statement. He basically says he's really, really selfish. But I think that a lot of drivers, yes, it's kind of a selfish thing that we all want practice and qualifying back. But look, I think that every single NASCAR session for the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and Truck Series needs at least some sort of warm-up to get these guys tuned up and ready to go for the week. These guys, especially for these super speed races, are not even allowed to have a tune-up session. I'm sorry, but that is a little bit unacceptable, the fact that they don't even get a tune-up session to make sure everything is up to snuff and up to par. Because what could happen is, we saw this at Daytona, I think it was David Reagan, if I'm not mistaken, he basically, or not David Reagan, Kaz Grau, whose car had issues. Had they resolved those issues and gotten a little bit of a warm-up session, you wouldn't have had those problems. Hell, even Eric Jones wouldn't have had problems, and you had drivers like Josh Williams who were screwed early in the race yesterday in the Xfinity race. I believe that some of those situations would have been resolved in an instant had these guys been able to get at least a little bit of practice. I think it's really disappointing that they can't get practice, and I do agree with Roush Chastain that there needs to be at least a warm-up session every single week and more practice, because 20 minutes, in my opinion, is not enough. I think there should only be one round of qualifying for all series, which Xfinity and Trucks usually does, except for the super speedways, and I think for the Cup Series, they should have a 45-minute practice session, and they should have basically a little bit of one qualifying session and not add extra for TV show. That's my opinion, though. I really hope NASCAR is listening, and I really hope they go ahead and add a little more practice going forward into the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, Bubba Wallace was interviewed by the media yesterday, and he basically spoke about Roger Carruth and what happened at Daytona International Speedway. If you saw what happened at Daytona, I believe it was on Thursday, on Friday last week, Bubba Wallace went over to confront Roger Carruth after basically being there, because Bubba Wallace is Roger Carruth's mentor. So he's there to help Roger Carruth in a really big way and help him grow as a race car driver. A lot of drivers in the sport right now don't have mentors. Bubba Wallace, who is a Cup Series winner, is going down there to try to help Roger Carruth out. And basically, he went over there to confront him, and what he said on Door Bumper Clear is he said, you got to do what's right from wrong. I got to tell you exactly how you're supposed to do these things. And what he did was just a little unacceptable, and basically wanted to correct him and help him out in a way that it doesn't become an issue. And Roger kind of reiterated those statements by saying that Bubba was just trying to tell me exactly what I did wrong from right and right from wrong. And I think he needs Roger having someone over there like Bubba to really help him and coach him. I think is going to be really huge for Roger Carruth's career, because Roger Carruth, whether we like it or not, is eventually going to be a driver in the NASCAR Cup Series. He's got massive connections with the Hendrick Motorsports group, and I think that is absolutely going to lead to him eventually getting up to the Cup Series in the future, whether it's with Spire, whether it's Hendrick Motorsports in the future. That is to be determined. But I really love the fact that he's getting a little bit of assistance and he's getting a little bit of help, especially in his career. I really hope that he can lead to a lot of success, and I really hope we do get to see some pretty big success come out from Roger in the future. And again, I think that it's a really good move for Bubba Wallace to be there to help guide his driver and help him and mentor the driver he's coaching in a big way overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Childress Racing. Now, Austin Kanensky from Motorsports Wire, which is part of US Today, put out an article talking about Richard Childress Racing. And Brett Griffin has said on Door Bumper Clear that he will be spotting in a third Richard Childress Racing car in 2024, confirming that we will see a third RCR car part-time in 2024. My best guess is that the number will be number 33. That car has ran a select number of races in the past. It actually was their last year, Brody Kosecki in the 33 team at the Indy Road Course, where they believe they finished in 18th position after having, I think, a speeding penalty at one point. And then in 2022, Austin Hill made his NASCAR Cup Series debut in that seat, finishing in 18th. My prediction on the drivers who I think will get behind the wheel, the first one who I think is going to drive for the team is Austin Hill. Austin Hill is basically the number one driver in their Xfinity program, as some are starting to even speculate that Austin Hill could eventually take over the 3-car full-time as early as next season, because Austin Dillon could go into an executive role as early as next year. I believe that Austin Hill is going to run some select races. We do know they're going to run the Chicago Street Course. We do know that they are going to run probably at Gateway. I think Brett kind of confirmed he's going to be going to Gateway as well. He'll be spotting for all those races, so cool for Brett to get the opportunity to spot for the 33 car. The other drivers I expect, I would think Brody Kosecki is going to drive in his car at one point as well. Brody Kosecki, he's having a little bit of issues at Erebus Racing over in Supercar. There's been a huge debacle going on over there. But I would imagine that Brody has a pretty big contract with RCR that he's working on that he'll probably run the Chicago Street Course with. I also think Jesse Love has to be a candidate for at least a Cup start this year, so considering Jesse Love has been pretty impressive in the first 2 races he's ran in Xfinity. I would imagine there's a chance he'll make his NASCAR Cup Series debut at some point this year. I could also see a driver like Matt DiBenedetto getting a chance and an opportunity to drive for this team as well. Maybe we see some other drivers in the RCR camp outside of that. Maybe SVG gets another start with Richard Childress Racing. Who knows at this point? But nonetheless, I think it is really cool to see that RCR is going to go ahead and run a third car for part-time this year, and I really hope it can be successful, especially Brody Kosecki and Austin Hill behind the wheel, and with how good RCR has started off the year, of Kyle Busch being the points leader after tonight's race, I do believe that they could be pretty solid and could have a good run with their third car in 2024. So pretty excited and glad to see that Rich Childress Racing is going to run a third car part-time in the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Frankie Muniz. Now, there has been a lot of talk and chatter and conversation as of recently that Frankie Muniz may have bought a part of an organization in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. According to Austin Kanensky from Motorsports Wire and also to people at Seriously Fast Motorsports and the media groups, there's been images that have been surfacing showing that Frankie Muniz has bought part ownership in Joey Gase Motorsports. And according to what it sounds like for some of the parts and what the bus looks like, it sounds like the team is going to be either called Muniz Gase Motorsports or Gase Muniz Motorsports. Remember, Frankie Muniz is going to be joining this team on a part-time basis in 2024. He's already ran at Daytona International Speedway. Obviously, that race did not go very, very well, unfortunately for Frankie Muniz, where sadly he crashed out. He is planning to run Phoenix Nest, and there's going to be a select number of races through the season that Frankie is going to run. If he is buying up in the Xfinity Series, I think that is absolutely huge because, one, I would imagine that Ford Performance is probably going to come into play and help out a lot more because right now, if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe Joey Gase Motorsports is right now getting massive support from Ford, which I think hurt Frankie in a big way because, unfortunately, like I said, he crashed out at Daytona. I would have to imagine that they're in talks and conversations about getting Ford Performance help and assistance because Ford is really high on Frankie Muniz. They really love him, which is understandable because Frankie Muniz is an extremely extremely likable guy, and I do believe he deserves to be in this series because I think he'll be very fast and very competitive regardless of what equipment he is in. He ran in some ARCA races last year and did a pretty good job, got a top 5 with Brett Jones, and I'd imagine that he'll do solid with the organization Joey Gase Motorsports this season as well. Again, I don't think that he's going to be competing for wins by any stretch of imagination, but I'd imagine if Ford is going to come in and help in a big way this year, I would have to imagine that that will help in a huge way of getting Frankie some better performances. Like I said, though, I'm just overall really happy to see that Frankie, it looks like, has taken over ownership role. Again, there's been nothing officially announced at this point, and the team has been reached out for statements from multiple sources. According to them, they have not been reached back. The sources that a lot of people have been saying have not reached back to this point. So it's kind of unknown at this point when this will get officially announced and finalized. But like I said, I do believe that we're going to see them do this and get this signed for the 2025 Ford season. I expect that Frankie will be a part owner of this team this year, which I think is pretty phenomenal to see if Frankie is moving up to Xfinity. He obviously wants to eventually go Cup Series racing in the not-so-distant future. Having him being part of this series is really cool, and nonetheless, glad to see that Frankie Meadows will, in fact, potentially become a part owner of this team in 2024. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the 2025 schedule. Now, I kind of talked about this on the channel last week, I think on Monday or Tuesday, but according to many reports, and Matt Weaver put out a really good article talking about this, among the things that might be coming to the 2025 NASCAR Cup Series schedule might be a race outside of the United States. It sounds like there might be a race in Canada, there might be a race in Mexico, and it all sounds like there might be a race in Southern California as well. That is 3 races that NASCAR is going to have to work on in a big way. Let's start off with Southern California first. There's been a lot of talk and conversations that the LA Coliseum likely will not come back in 2025 because this year was the 3rd year of their 3-year contract they had with the racetrack, which is a pretty big reason why they potentially wouldn't return to the LA Coliseum. But if NASCAR is true in saying that they're going to stay in the Southern California market, they're going to have to go to a different track because Auto Club, while they are starting on construction, they're working toward getting that done. Auto Club Speedway, the earliest that track is going to be ready is 2026. So it's going to be at least a little bit before they do get that track officially finalized and ready to go. So I think there's 2 options that they could go with. Irwindale Speedway is one of them. Irwindale Speedway is a track that's been getting renovated really, really quickly. They've got some things they need to do, but they have been renovating the racetrack at a pretty solid rate. The other track is Long Beach. There's a lot of talk Chicago Street Course may not be back past this year. They could be going to Chicagoland in the future. So I would have to imagine that they might be looking at Long Beach for a street course race as well, especially with access to the Chicago Street Course. I think with Long Beach, they'd have to do it a little earlier than IndyCar and IMSA, but they might go there. Then you look at Canada and Mexico. Next, let's talk about Mexico. There is, of course, Autodromo Hernando Rodriguez track that could come back into play as a points-paying race, but what a lot of people are speculating is that there's a lot of talk that they might be going there for the Busch Light Clash, meaning they go out of the country for the first time for the Busch Light Clash because it's always been in the United States. So I would imagine that they're looking at Guadalajara or Mexico City or stadiums in there that soccer stadiums play or football. If you're not from the United States, they call it football. But I think that basically that could be a potential possibility where they end up going to Mexico and going to Guadalajara or going to the Autodromo Hernando Rodriguez track. And finally, Canada. Canada almost did actually have a NASCAR Cup Series race in 2024. We came very close to running at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve International Raceway. And unfortunately, the reason why we didn't go to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve is because of the fact that basically F1 moved their race a little bit earlier in the year from where they originally had it. I think it was on the week that NASCAR was supposed to be there. They moved it to that point. So that's why they didn't end up running in Canada at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. I think that they're going to go there next year. If not Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, though, I think Canadian Tire is a really good option to go with. At Mosport, really great racing facility for the truck series. Always put on really, really good shows. And I think the racing would be phenomenal and very, very good if that, in fact, ended up taking place. So I do believe that there is going to be a racing outside the U.S. I know some people think it's just a pipe dream as Steve Phelps talking and saying that it's just unfounded promises at this point. But I actually do believe that they are going to have this happen. I believe that they are going to go ahead and go outside the United States for the first time. And I think it would be solid and very, very successful, nonetheless, for NASCAR if they go outside the U.S. They need to get an international audience. They're trying to grow their brand. A lot of sports are expanding globally. And I think the next big move for NASCAR is to go ahead and go outside the United States. I think it'll be very fun to watch and see what happens in regards to that and see how things kind of pan out over there. But it sounds like right now there's going to be some pretty big moves with the 2025 schedule. And honestly, the moves that are being talked about actually got me really pumped up and really excited overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch Motorsports. Now, it was reported by the North Carolina's Business Journal that Kyle Busch Motorsports is reportedly suing Rev Racing for missed payments. According to documents in the court cases, it sounds like that they owe $325,000 to KBM, also known as Kyle Busch Motorsports. We're talking about Rev Racing. According to what the articles have stated, apparently the Rev Racing group is basically working on trying to figure out their finances and figure out a solution to the problem, and they're hoping to settle this amicably, or whatever you say it. Then you look at Kyle Busch Motorsports and the lawyers from KBM, and they are saying that they also expect this to not get blown up way out of proportion and don't expect this to be very, very crazy. Like I mentioned a second ago, the reason that KBM is suing Rev Racing, which is kind of interesting because Kyle Busch basically drove the 7 truck, which was a teammate to Rev Racing, which could be interesting at Las Vegas next week, which will be the second race that Kyle Busch runs. Kyle Busch, of course, was able to get the win with Spire Motorsports in his old number 51 truck, which, of course, KBM got purchased by Spire, which we'll get to that in a second. But this is absolutely really, really huge and one of the craziest stories to start this year. KBM and Kyle Busch has already been in a lot of lawsuits up to this point already. Remember, we talked about Rowdy Energy at the beginning of the year, where Rowdy Energy was being sued, I think, for their power burn stuff, which Kyle Busch, I think, shut the company down. One of the reasons being is because he unfortunately got sued. And now you've got KBM doing the other thing where they're suing Rev Racing. According to the article as well, from what is being said, is that basically they missed a lot of payments. Even the payments that they are missing, they were late on payments over to KBM, and they weren't giving them the money. Because from what the original agreement stated back in October, when this was basically finalized in 2022, they were supposed to pay, I think, $2.9 million or $3.9 million. I think it was $2.9 million, and they only paid $2.5 million. I do believe that this is going to get resolved very, very quickly, because if it doesn't get resolved, this could be a massive distraction for not only Rev Racing with Nick Sanchez, who's looking to win a championship this year, and they just most recently won a Daytona, so that does help them a little bit, but it also could hurt Spire Motorsports in a big way, and it's also could hurt Kyle Busch Motorsports in a big way. I wouldn't be shocked and surprised if one of the reasons why that this ended up happening, where KBM shut down their Truck Series program and sold it off to Spire, is because they weren't getting paid and they weren't getting the sponsor money that they deserve. And it's unfortunate that it has gotten to this point, because I think this is the first time that KBM has actually been involved in lawsuits. I don't think KBM's ever been in a lawsuit before, which is absolutely wild why this is happening in the first place. Like I said, I do believe that this is going to end up getting resolved relatively quickly, and I think that this will be figured out in the not-so-distant future. Until then, I think it will get settled out of court, and I think that money will be paid back. Again, I don't expect this to go very, very crazy, but the fact that there is a lawsuit that is coming out of this, I think is pretty huge and a big story to kind of watch out for, especially when you're looking at Kyle Busch and really helping and assisting the team, because Kyle Busch is over there at Spire Motorsports and is driving for them and is competing against Rev Racing, which is a team that sadly did not pay for them at this moment. So again, it's a pretty big story to watch out for, especially if you are a fan of Kyle Busch. You're probably not happy with Rev Racing. It's a shame it's gotten to this point where there's payments that are sadly missing. Again, I do think it is going to get resolved pretty quickly here. I don't think this goes farther than what we're hearing. So I would imagine that this will get resolved pretty quickly, and it will get resolved out of court. So again, pretty big story to watch out for sure, and keep an eye on as time progresses and flies. But I do believe, like I said, that this story will get settled pretty quickly, and I do believe that they will at least figure this out very, very quickly and relatively soon, especially for the future and sake of KBM and Rev Racing, for them to be competitive, because they could lose a lot of money here. Because I don't think that Max Siegel's a bad dude. He's had a lot of drivers like Kyle Larson, Bubba Wallace go through his circuit, and even Raja now, who's driving for Spire, go for a circuit as well. So I think it will get approved, and at least the situation will get resolved, and I think that this lawsuit will not go farther than what the information we have currently at this particular moment. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Daniel Suarez. Now, Daniel Suarez was able to pick up his second career NASCAR Cup Series victory earlier this evening. But there has been a lot of talk and questions surrounding Daniel Suarez going into this year and whether or not Daniel Suarez was going to be returning to Trackhouse Racing in 2024 or not. Well, according to Justin Marks during the press conference tonight, it sounds like that Daniel Suarez will likely be returning to Trackhouse Racing in 2025. Justin Marks says he kind of squashed a lot of the rumors and the belief that he was going to be letting go of Daniel Suarez. A performance didn't happen. He also kind of talked about the fact that they brought in a new crew chief, that being Max Swiderski, swapped it over with Conor Lich Racing. They basically made a crew chief swap to really help out Daniel Suarez. And you look at Daniel Suarez to start off this year. He's not just the fact that he won the most recent race at Atlanta Motor Speedway earlier this evening, but it's also based on the fact that he had one of the fastest cars near the end of the Daytona 500 and was in position along with Roush to be able to pick up the win. But why were there a lot of questions surrounding Daniel Suarez? Well, you look at what happened with Trackhouse Racing this past year. They have signed 3 really good drivers in the last year or so. They just signed Shane Van Gisbergen, who of course just finished in a podium position in 3rd place and in 3rd position and got his first top 5 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. We just talked about that here a second ago. You've also got Zane Smith, who's driving the 71 car for KBM Motorsports, which has a Trackhouse alliance. And we know that they are trying in a pretty big way to bring Zane in full-time to the Trackhouse family in 2024-5. And then, of course, you do have Conor Lich, who is a young prospect who, like we talked about, has been really, really good. Won a Trans Am race this week, and I think that Conor Lich ain't going to be long before he's Cup Series racing. That was why there were a lot of questions surrounding Daniel Suarez. But I do believe that this win that Daniel Suarez got earlier this evening, I think this saves him. But that brings into a lot of questions surrounding Trackhouse Racing and what they're going to do next year. Because I think there's a good chance that Trackhouse could be a 4-car team next year. One thing they could do is purchase some charters. Obviously, the charter market is going to be open at the end of this year. There's expected to potentially be a charter agreement signed. We're going to talk about that in the other episode you'll see later this morning. But the charters could be open, and some speculate that maybe we could see Trackhouse purchase some charters from Conor Lich Racing. Obviously, Conor Lich Racing's been having major issues with funding and sponsorship. I could see him at least losing 1, if not 2 of their charters. That could be a key there. Also, look at Suarez Racing could lose a charter if they don't sign their contract with Ford. Obviously, there's a lot of talk that SHR might not even stay with Ford past this year, and they may switch manufacturers, which could lead to them losing a charter, which is around $40 to $50 million, and having all 4 drivers in there. Because I think that they've got a really strong team with Roush Chastain, Daniel Suarez, Shane Van Gisbergen, and Zane Smith, if all 4 drivers do, in fact, end up going there. But again, having this win is a massive confidence booster, and it's not really technically, it's actually his second win of the year. Remember, he won the NASCAR Mexico race at the LA Coliseum, which I think was a massive confidence booster for, and I think it's really helped him in a big way these last couple of races. So I expect Daniel Suarez to return to this team this year, and I do expect that Daniel Suarez will have a very solid and good year with Trackhouse Racing this year. He did say that, being Daniel Suarez, said that his goal is to win multiple races to be exactly sure. And I do believe that he is going to win some more races. And also, like we talked about, is he became the first foreign-born driver to be able to go out there and win in 2 different types of tracks. He won an oval race, of course, at Atlanta, and won a road course race at Sonoma. We've been waiting for Daniel Suarez to really break out, and for him to finally get that second career win, I think is huge for his confidence. He didn't have a really great year last year, struggled, which is why these questions have been coming up. But I believe Daniel Suarez does deserve to be in this seat. And I've kind of said that he probably wasn't going to be let go from Trackhouse Racing, but you always kind of had that in the back of your mind thinking, hey, is Trackhouse Racing considering getting rid of me, or are they not going to? Because let's be honest, Daniel Suarez has been at Trackhouse Racing for 4 years. This is year number 4 for Daniel Suarez at Trackhouse, but now he's starting the year off on a really good note. And getting that win tonight was a really huge confidence booster, not just for Daniel, but I think the whole team in general. And you look at Trackhouse Racing, they had a big weekend. Conor Lich won a Trans Am race, SVG finished 3rd. In general, I think Trackhouse Racing is in a very good and really amazing position as an organization and team, and they really have nothing to lose. I expect Daniel Suarez to get a multi-year extension with this team probably. I don't think he'll just be back for 2025. I think Daniel Suarez will in fact get a contract extension through 2026 and 2027. And I think a lot of that will probably start happening once the charter negotiations and agreements do finally end up getting finalized here relatively soon. But I'm just happy to see that Daniel Suarez is likely returning to Trackhouse. I think he deserves behind the wheel of a Trackhouse Racing seat, and I think he'll do a really solid job with this team in 2025 especially. And I think he'll win races like next year like he did this year, because I don't really think there's a lot of drivers that are going to be available in the Xfinity Series. I don't think Sam Mayer is going to go over there unless Junior Motorsports was to make the jump up the Cup. Nonetheless, I'm really happy about this and glad to see that Daniel Suarez is going to be returning to Trackhouse more than likely in 2025. So, that is going to be it for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support on Patreon as well. Links description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Are you excited to see that Daniel Suarez is likely returning to Trackhouse next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Busch Motorsports suing Rev Racing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, there's going to be another NASCAR news video discussing all the other stuff we didn't talk about in this video. Then tomorrow on the channel, there is going to be the entry list video for the Las Vegas race, Cup Series race. And then there will also, I think, the Pensacola 400. There might also be the Truck Series race picks dropping, probably not. Wednesday, there's going to be another NASCAR news video dropping. We'll have a lot of penalties to kind of talk about, which you'll hear about a lot of those potentially in a video later today. There's a lot of content dropping as we head to Las Vegas Motor Speedway. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.